A lot at stake for the Denver Broncos in this game. Not so much for the Chargers, but still plenty of drama for Week 18. It's Crossover Thursday.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Broncos fans, Chargers fans. If you made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back because your team is in the playoffs. Absolutely. The Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers will be playing in the postseason. And of course, these two teams kind of looking ahead to that, but also plenty of drama here for Week 18. The Denver Broncos fighting for the number one seed. The Chargers trying to get to the postseason as healthy as possible. And we're going to break down every possible aspect of this matchup for you on a special Crossover Thursday edition, Locked On Broncos and Locked On Chargers. My name is Sayre Bedinger, co-host of the Locked On Broncos podcast, here with Daniel Wade, co-host of Locked On Chargers as well. And we appreciate every single one of you everydayers out there for making Locked On Broncos, Locked On Chargers your first listen of the day every single day. And as always, Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Daniel, very excited to get to do a crossover with you together as, you know, two teams that I know the Chargers have been to the postseason. Obviously, you know, the Broncos, they went last year, but it feels different this year because as you and I were talking off camera, you know, we love our guys over there, Locked On Chiefs, Locked On Raiders, your boy Q, Chris, and Ryan. But man, you know what? It feels good to kind of be the last one standing here this season, doesn't it?
Yeah, I especially feel bad for Q because like they had, so much hope. Like you get Pete Carroll, right? You get Geno Smith, you haven't had a quarterback. But no, I mean, definitely different kind of crossovers this year with the Chargers and the Broncos basically looking down upon the Chiefs the entire season. So couldn't have asked for more than that inside the division. The only down part is this game could have been a battle for the AFC West, but I think Chargers fans will appreciate a Sunday with a little less pressure on it and a chance to play spoiler a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the same for Broncos country, although Broncos country will be sweating it out once again as we were on Christmas night. Everybody, once we start to expect like, hey, it's going to be a stress-free weekend or, you know, you're playing somebody's backup, that's when the Broncos seem to make it maybe the most stressful this year. I know they did on Christmas night with Chris Oladokun and the Chiefs, and It was not a stress-free evening there. But obviously the big storyline for this game for the Broncos perspective is fighting for that number one seed. And you mentioned it, the Chargers, they are going to be obviously, you know, a little bit more on the relaxed side this weekend in terms of kind of know your fate. You're going to be road warriors for the playoffs. It's exciting to think that these two teams could potentially, you know, maybe the divisional round, maybe the AFC championship. We'll see how things kind of play out the rest of the AFC. But I think that's kind of where everybody's at right now, is like one eye on beyond Week 18.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the funny thing about this game in particular is the Chargers, had they wanted to play it out and, had their best chance to win, they could have ended up with a wild card game against the Broncos. Had they taken, knocked them down a peg, had the Jaguars jump them, and now it's a 6-3 matchup. So they could, mess around and accidentally, end up with a game next week against this Broncos team. But I do think there is something especially for Trey Lance, right? A guy who's bounced around the league. This last preseason obviously is preseason, but looked like an improved player and now gets a chance to show it. Like if you're talking about making some money for yourself, man, he has a chance against, one of, if not the best defenses in the league this week to show exactly how much he's been able to improve. And I think that'll be kind of the interesting thing. I mean, you talked about off the air just last year, the Chiefs last weekend of the season, Broncos still was something to play for. They start Carson Wentz and you're like, yeah, I guess there's a chance. And then the Broncos end up blowing them out. It'll be interesting to see kind of how competitive this game is. And I also just think like interesting to see what Greg Roman does. These teams could play again in the playoffs, right? So how much are the Chargers willing to divulge in this game? Do they just kind of throw it back to his Colin Kaepernick days, his Lamar Jackson days, and it's all RPOs and read options, and they just try to run the ball 50 times, and it looks like a completely different offense? So I think there's a lot of fun parts of this, and the Chargers kind of get to sit back and, if they do somehow find a way to win, obviously that'll have the Broncos with some pretty bad vibes going into the playoffs.
That's kind of what I'm thinking as well. I mean, it was the same discussion last year before it was 38-0 against the Chiefs. It was a lot of Broncos country and even Chiefs fans talking about, hey, don't forget, like, Carson Wentz has played in a lot of big games in the NFL. And so it was a lot of that worry. And I think that stems from obviously the fact that there's a lot at stake, right? I mean, from the Broncos perspective, it's that number one seed. You want to be hosting throughout the playoffs, if at all possible. And to have that not happen, it does kind of feel like it would take the wind out of their sails in a little bit. Now, of course, a Sean Payton coach team, you've got a number of key leaders on this team that have been deep in the playoffs. I don't necessarily know that it would be deflating to the point that, man, it's just, that's what killed their season, was losing in week 18. However, I do think that a game like this, if you go in, you're playing against a lot of backups, you're playing against Trey Lance. I mean, the Broncos have not necessarily been great against the backup quarterbacks all season long. I mean, we just saw it on Christmas night against Chris Oladokun. So their focus is going to have to be top tier, and that's the expectation. I think that's why Broncos country is a little bit, just on edge about this. Not necessarily nervous about the fact that you're going up against these guys, but it's really this being on edge at awaiting the result and figuring out what is going to be your playoff fate.
100%. That's the thing, is if you're caught feeling like, okay, hey, we're not going to have a game next week, and then all of a sudden you do, yeah, that's a much different experience, right? And I do think that it'll be interesting to see if that game on Christmas Day against the Chiefs and their third string quarterback was kind of the wake up call that Broncos team needed to not mess around, and play with their food at all in this game. Again, that Chiefs team did put a bunch of players on IR before that game. At the same time, you still had guys like Chris Jones out there. You still had guys like Travis Kelce out there. In this game, it's going to be a little less star-studded on the Chargers side. I mean, you're not going to see guys like Khalil Mack or Derwin James or Tuli Tuipulotu, who, has 13 sacks this season. Those guys will not be playing. Offensively, you're going to be seeing basically the entirety of the Chargers' backup offensive line. And I mean, if anyone remembers that first matchup in week 3, even with Joe Alt, the Chargers could barely handle what the Denver Broncos were sending their way until very late in that game. So I do think on the plus side, and something for Chargers fans to look forward to, is for an offensive line, that has had a lot of problems, there are guys that are going to get a chance in this game. That's part of my biggest matchups too. But like young guys having a chance to step into a roles that they haven't had yet, I think is more reason for Chargers fans to be invested in this game, because you could see some guys that are playing this week that have a chance to earn bigger roles in a potential playoff run.
Absolutely. And they are going to get a look at what it's like to play in the playoffs, because Broncos country is going to be absolutely rocking there. It's been, Sean Payton has actually made note about, it's been loud, obviously, but, for the past, he pointed to the Packers game a handful of weeks ago as to when it really seemed to shift in terms of the volume of the stadium being an impact on the game. And I think he's continually calling for it in the media because he likes that advantage that you have at the home field, right? And so those guys, those young players for the Chargers, going to get a taste of what that's like. And I like it from the Broncos perspective as well. We've been talking about it a lot of the year because the Broncos have played a number of backup quarterbacks. There's no denying that. When, people in Broncos country having arguments on social media, things like that about, well, you played this backup and you played this team's backup and you only won by one score. I think that the benefit to having this sort of environment with the stakes is exactly what this Broncos team needs. While the Chargers getting great evaluation on young players who could be contributing maybe at a bigger role going forward, the Broncos are getting, it doesn't matter who they're going up against. The stakes are what they are, and that atmosphere is going to be exactly what it's going to be in the postseason. So it's a big opportunity, I would say, for both sides.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then, there's just that little thing where if the Chargers can keep it competitive, right? Like Jesse Minter obviously is going to be out there working with, guys where he's constantly kind of maximized their talent and stuff like that. And he has a chance to kind of send a message a little bit. But if they can do it, this is a budding rivalry, right? Like the Chiefs have rivalries with every team, obviously, and the Chargers and Broncos have given them tough games, and obviously both of them swept that team this year. But it does feel like the Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, Broncos, Chargers rivalry is kind of on the rise in the AFC West. So I do think where it's like, hey, the Chargers players, if they're out there and they have a chance, and the longer that the Broncos keep them in the game, the more kind of that belief will build in them that, hey, maybe we can do something fun here, and, maybe we don't need Justin Herbert. Maybe we don't need it. Now, it could go either way, because it could go like the game last year where they get behind early and it ends up being a laugher. And I fully expect that it could be that type of a game. But if the Broncos let them hang around, it might become a little more interesting.
Absolutely. And that's something that we're going to break down. As you mentioned, there's tons of new players out there for the Chargers in terms of what the Broncos come to expect, or what Broncos country has come to expect. Obviously, no Justin Herbert. We mentioned Trey Lance is going to be getting showcased in this game, but there's going to be a number of other players out there for the Chargers that still present interesting matchups for the Broncos. And of course, Broncos country's got a number of players that they're looking at. Hey, can this guy get back on track? Riley Moss, can he get back on track? The pass rush, kind of, a little bit of a dip in the sack numbers. Can they get back on track? We're going to break down some of the key matchups for this game coming up on today's Crossover Thursday edition. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Chargers. Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Robinhood. Nobody knows your money goals better than you. Robinhood puts you in control of your money with tools that work as hard as you do. Locking in on every opening, beating your PR, beating it again, channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control of your money. Trade stocks and ETFs, options, futures, and crypto all in one platform. You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood Legends advanced tools, or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself. Expect more from your money. Get started today at Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move. Some key matchups for the Denver Broncos against the Los Angeles Chargers here in Week 18. Of course, it's going to be a large new cast of characters for the Chargers. Pretty much the same cast of characters for the Denver Broncos this week. We're going to break down this pass rush going up against an offensive line for the Chargers that, as Daniel mentioned, they've struggled at times this season, of course, with injuries, things like that. How can this Broncos pass rush be and, take advantage of that? And how can Trey Lance adjust to that with his ability to make plays with his legs? We're going to break all that down coming up on today's show. But want to quickly say thank you to every single one of you everydayers out there that makes Locked On Broncos, Locked On Chargers your first listen of the day every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And you know what else? We want to invite you. If you're not an everydayer all access member yet, go ahead and become one. There's going to be a link for you in the show notes, and you're going to get tons of bonus content, bonus episodes of the shows, all 22 breakdowns, a discount on Locked On merch, which they're putting some great stuff out there as well, and so much more. So if you want to check that out, please do. We invite you to do so. We'd love it if you would check that out. Daniel, let's talk about the matchups in this game. Of course, I think offensive line versus pass rush, that's kind of a big one. Let's start there. What's your kind of take there as the Chargers? You said it, they're going to be playing their backup offensive line largely in this game. What does that look like for them? Who's going to be out there? Because I know they've already been using a number of replacements this season.
Yeah, I guess that's the funny thing about the Chargers offensive line is like it could be a whole offensive line of backups, and like all of those guys have started for the Chargers basically at some point this year. So not familiar to playing time, or not unfamiliar with the playing time, but this will be a much different looking unit. On Wednesday's practice, it ended up being Bobby Hart out there for the Chargers at right tackle instead of Trey Pipkins. They had Trevor Penning, the guy they just traded for, at right guard. Backup center Andre James, or 6th round rookie Branson Taylor at left guard, and then their left tackle this week is going to end up being not Jamari Sawyer, who was injured and had that hamstring injury before. Now he's probably going to miss this week as well. And why would you play him, right? Like we saw last week how important he is, and now you have an extra week to rest him. There's no chance you're going to, not have that guy on the field. But what it also brings, and what I think Chargers fans are looking forward to, is the fact that potentially be excited about some new guys stepping up and potentially earning themselves some playing time, because Austin Decula stepped in. He'll be the left tackle this week. He'll have a chance to potentially show that he can still bring something to the table, or maybe build some confidence going into the playoff run if Jamari Sawyer's not available. But I think the biggest one is their right guard in this game, who's really only played tackle for them, Trevor Penning, because they tried to start him at left tackle because of the injury to Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. It was a disaster. But Mekhi Becton's been in and out of the lineup this year so far. He's really struggled and hasn't been the addition to that line they thought he was going to be. And I know Chargers fans are kind of hoping that this is an audition for Trevor Penning, that even, that you gave the money to Mekhi Becton, that maybe he could be the guy that starts at right guard for the Chargers in the playoffs, because they haven't been getting enough out of that position. So this game against, a Denver front that's pretty healthy and is very, very dangerous, to show, hey, maybe I should be getting some looks with the starting lineup going into the playoffs because it's been so uncertain there this year.
Yeah, that's a huge opportunity for Trevor Penning there because obviously the Broncos, they're going to bring a ton of different guys on that interior. They rotate so many players. We saw John Franklin Myers last week against the Chiefs. He actually played a pretty minimal number of snaps compared to what we're used to. He's dealing with a little injury there. He's expected to be back at full go this week. So we'll see if the Broncos do play it. That's the other side of this whole thing, Daniel, is that we don't necessarily know, are the Broncos going to be hesitant with any of these guys as well, that they're looking at potentially, okay, like we said, they've got
If you're
one eye on the
borderline.
postseason.
Yeah.
If you're borderline, are you playing in this game? So they trust a number of guys out there. Zach Allen obviously leads that group, but then you've got players like DJ Jones, Malcolm Roach, even Inyoma Uwazurike, kind of a forgotten guy. He's been really stepping up a lot this year on the interior. So a great test for that Chargers offensive line in this game. And I think on the flip side of that, the Broncos offensively, every time I watch the Chargers this season, Daniel, I'm just so impressed by the secondary. I mean, you mentioned Derwin James not likely to play in this game, but they've drafted so well at corner. And I think that that's one of those things that we talk about ball hawks on the back end. They've got the guys. They've got players who can make plays on the football. What is that going to look like in this game? Because I think everybody expects the Broncos to have their full complement of receivers. Pat Bryant was a limited participant at practice, so I wonder if he's going to be back after the concussion suffered against the Jaguars a couple weeks ago. They're expected to have their full complement of receivers potentially available. What do you think that Chargers secondary is going to look like overall?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think there's a lot of different ways they could go with that unit. And at least according to the Wednesday's practice report, it doesn't look like they're going to sit a bunch of guys in that secondary. Obviously, Derwin James is a proven commodity, so you know exactly what he brings to the table. He's not going to play in this game. But the two guys you're talking about that have been the true ball hawks, unlikely hero, Tony Jefferson, right, who out of football altogether, now comes back this year, has 4 interceptions this year. He had 4 interceptions his entire career up until this point. And then he's been, unexpected ball hawk that's ended games for the Chargers this year. And then Dante Jackson, to me, I would be really surprised if he's out there. I don't know what else you need to see from him specifically at this point. And so he isn't on the injury report at all, but it's like, okay, well, are you going to play the guy that leads the team in picks? You kind of already know he's a veteran guy. Unlike, guys like Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart, who are second-year players who have been starting for you all season, but there's no reason for them not to go get more experience this week and go up against, what has been a pretty good offense. But I do think that is kind of the subplot to this game is Jesse Minter, who all of a sudden, much to Chargers fans' chagrin, has become a really hot head coaching name in the 2026 cycle. And so he has a chance to kind of do something fun in this game where he's like, I know I've been maximizing a lot of dudes, especially in the secondary, and Steve Klinkscale deserves a ton of credit for that. Look what I can do when I don't have my stars against, the team who ranks 9th in offensive yards per game, 14th in points per game. Look what I can do even with some backup. So he'll have, a chance to kind of put some sprinkles on top of his resume as he goes into this offseason as a potential head coach candidate. So Bo Nix obviously has struggled at times. I don't think he's been terrible against the Chargers, but the Chargers have had his numbers so far. He's 0-3 against them. 2 out of 3 games, 20 points or less for that Broncos offense. Jesse Minter versus, with his backups versus this Broncos offense, I think is interesting.
It really is. And that's the chess match that's going to come into play here is, like you said, especially if the game is close, how aggressive did they end up getting? How much did they really pull out of the bag on both sides of the ball? Because
when they missed some chances, Sayre, too. I mean, let's remember that first game, right? Bo Nix, obviously, they beat the Chargers on that 50-yard, fake toss out to the side and then get them deep. But there was a couple other plays where the Chargers got pretty lucky that Bo Nix was not able to connect, right? But they had their chances. It'll be interesting if they can capitalize this time.
And that is interesting too, because it almost feels like a lifetime ago at this point, but also it's sort of representative of the way the Broncos have responded this year or how teams have defended them since then. They've really, I think teams saw what they did last year in terms of taking the top off with the deep ball, and teams have really done their best to take that away from
they
the
respect
Broncos
it
this
now,
year.
for sure.
They're respecting it 100%. And so the opportunities that have been there, when you're hitting, 50% or less, it feels like it's just never happening, right?
Yeah.
So the Broncos explosives offensively, that is going to be fascinating to see. How aggressive are they in a game like this where, you do have so much at stake? Are you going to
Yeah.
try to push the ball downfield? Are you going to try to be aggressive and hunt with that? Or are you going to continue to do what they've done? Like Steve Spagnuolo last week played a whole different type of defense against them, and it forced the Broncos, 14 plays here, 15 plays there. You
Yeah.
got a dink and dunk down the field and then convert in the red zone. I feel like maybe we could get another situation like that this week, where it's just like, hey, we're going to keep everything in front of us. We're going to allow these guys to rally and tackle, force you to have target practice out there versus zone coverage, and see what happens. But that's going to be huge, I think, in this game for sure.
Yeah, one, I mean, of course, last week, the Chargers, you start off the game down 14-0 against that defense on the other side with a 43-yard touchdown and a 75-yard bomb. So, like, they obviously have some things to fix on the back end. Their strength is their communication, but it was tested last time against the Broncos, and it was definitely tested last week. So, as far as big stars not being out there, of course, you have to figure that stuff out on the back end, because that was your starters last week. That ended up, they've only given up 6 points in the second halves of the last 3 games combined. So, like, they've been really hot, especially in the second half. But they need to figure out some of those issues on the back end, whether it's the backups or the starters in there.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating to find out in this game, how they respond to that, how the Broncos kind of respond, like you said, to maybe having a wake-up call against the Kansas City Chiefs last Thursday as well.
Yeah.
Broncos fans, Chargers fans, we're going to talk a little bit more about keys to victory in this game, and we'll also kind of put an eye on the future beyond this week, right? The playoffs. What does it hold for these two teams? Of course, we know there's a game yet to be played, but there's still plenty to come after this week for both of these squads. We're going to break it down on today's Crossover Thursday edition. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Chargers. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with Prize Picks, it always feels good to be right. And with high-pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down. And Prize Picks lets you stay in control. Prize Picks is the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on player projections. And you don't need any drafts, no waiting. Just pick more or less and play your way. Prize Picks has made watching games so much more engaging, especially when you're following individual player performances, right? And I love the flexibility with options like Flex Play, where you can still get paid even if one of your picks misses. And the early payouts feature, complete game changer, because if your player starts out hot, you can cash out before the game ends. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Keys to victory for week 18, where two teams have a lot of different things at stake in this game. The Chargers auditioning a number of players, the Broncos fighting for the number 1 seed. And of course, there's a lot else going on around the AFC, and we're excited to break it down for you here today on Crossover Thursday. Once again, just want to say thank you to all the everydayers out there that make us your first listen of the day every single day. Daniel, I'm interested for your perspective on this, and we'll talk about the AFC as a whole, but it's been a crazy year, hasn't it? I mean, it's been just like we went into the season thinking like, all right, there's these tiers, right, of teams right now. There's the Bills, the Chiefs, the Ravens, and everybody else in the AFC just kind of fighting, as like little brothers. It feels good to not be that at this stage of the season, but at the same time, like, I want your perspective. Like, this weekend, different vibe. The following weekend, though, I don't think necessarily we're going to get a chance. Maybe, you never know what could happen. But I don't necessarily think we're going to do a crossover next week. What's the vibe for the Chargers? Like, what's the key for the Chargers right now? Not just in week 18, but going forward.
Yeah, I think the vibe is weird because the Chargers have surpassed expectations from the standpoint of, what many thought this season would be for them once they lost Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. And at the same time, the vibe is also, man, what a terrible year to lose Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, because, like, I just think that we would be looking at a completely different conversation if the Chargers had those guys healthy. And it's hard not to feel like you missed an opportunity here in what is a pretty wide open AFC, right? Like, I don't think there's any prohibitive favorite. I think every team kind of has their flaws and is, hot or maybe cooling off a little bit. But I do think for the Chargers, like, man, if you did have your guys, obviously, and your, Pro Bowl / all pro level tackles, this could be your year, right? Or maybe you are thought of in a different light. Maybe you are thought of as a Super Bowl threat, like a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Because I don't know if they're in that conversation right now for me, which is the funny thing, because it's like there's a part of it that's like, hey, it's kind of house money because like no one thought you should be here. They had such a tougher schedule this year, and they're in the playoffs with basically 2 weeks left, right? Which is a foreign kind of feeling for them. And you're not necessarily expected to win, and like no one really expected you to get there anyway, so like who cares? At the same time, the narrative around Justin Herbert with or without his tackles continues if you don't find a way to get a playoff win. And I know, obviously, as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, I'm not going to be excited for that narrative surrounding them if they're not able to win and not able to get that monkey off of Justin Herbert's back, because it's just like, I watch him every week, so I know how good he is, right? But that doesn't matter. If you go in and go to 0-3 in the playoffs, nobody's going to, remember that you didn't have your tackles, and nobody really expected you to get there. It's just going to be 0-3 in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's similar with like Josh Allen. He's won 7 playoff games, and all anybody ever talks about is how you can't get past Patrick Mahomes, right? It's
right. The goalposts keep moving no matter what, even if you get the win.
That's 100% accurate. What you just described too reminded me, I had to look it up to make sure I was right, but the 2013 Broncos, I mean, they came in obviously that year with tons of expectations, and then you lose Ryan Clady, who was playing at the best football that he's ever been playing at that time. You lose him for the season, and then in the middle of that year, then you lose Von Miller after he had just an MVP caliber season the year before. So you lose 2 guys, and it's like, all right, now it's up to your quarterback to make up for everything and everybody else. Yeah. So I think that Broncos country can kind of empathize in that way a little bit. But you're right. I mean, it is getting that monkey off the back. And Justin, I mean, he's out there. I've been calling it the Chubbs Peterson hand because he looks like he's got the Chubbs Peterson hand from Happy Gilmore. But he's out there doing whatever the heck that he has to do to will his team to victory. So I think we can all admire that, even if, it's behind enemy lines there. But yeah, I think in this game in particular, what are we looking at here in terms of keys to victory? I know we break this down every single week, crossover Thursday. If the Chargers are going to win this game, what do you think has to happen? Because I think from the Broncos perspective, it's really just about don't make mistakes, number one. And number two, force the Chargers to make a lot of mistakes. That's something the Broncos have not done this year, Daniel, is force other teams to make mistakes. 8 games without forcing a turnover this season for, like you said, it could be one of the best, if not the best defense in the league. They've got 8 games where they've got 0 turnovers, 0 takeaways. That's the theme for this team this season, I think, is the offense having a slim margin for error. Even as good as the defense has been, they're not getting those extra possessions that most other top-tier teams are getting.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point. And the Chargers are kind of on the flip side of that where, because I think the good thing for Broncos fans with that specific conversation is, you're a really good defense when you're a really good defense, even without the takeaways, right? Because you look at teams like the Chicago Bears or some of these other teams, even the Chargers to a certain extent, who rely so heavily on the takeaways, right, to be an elite team, that it's like that can be a little bit more fluky, like takeaways are not something that is always repeatable week in and week out, as the Broncos fans know. But I think for the Chargers, it was a fun keys to victory this week because it's just such a different game from their perspective. But I think it's pretty simple as far as the rookies have to shine. Like, this is such a showcase for those guys like Trey Harris, 2nd-round pick, or Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's stuck behind Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston. He'll get a bunch of run in this game too, and get to show themselves against a former, the last year's defensive player of the year and an elite Denver secondary. I think the second thing, run the ball 40 times. Like, that is the only kind of vision I have in my head where the Chargers could be able to pull this game off, is where they just turn it into a total slugfest. Last week, they had 7 offensive linemen on the field at one point. Maybe they just really try to muck it up out there. Just run a wing T offense, right? I want 60 or 70 rushing yards out of Trey Lance, too, in this one. And my last thing is just, like, make it weird. There's no clean way the Chargers win this game, right? Like that, in my mind, at least. you're not going to be able to win unless something weird happens. Like I'm talking a punt or kickoff return touchdown. Somebody gets a pick six or a wild scoop and score. Maybe you try to redo that hook and ladder you tried the other week against the Chiefs, but I don't think there's a clean way for the Chargers to win this one. I think it has to be kind of chaos. So if they are going to win, I think they have to make it a weird game.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and well said as well. Just in terms of what you're looking for out of that, all the young players on this team to come in and do just whatever they can to possibly, like you said, make it weird. I think that's a great way to put it. I think from the Broncos end of things, there's a couple guys you want to get going. I think offensively, though, it's a broken record of wanting to get Evan Ingram going a little bit more. We've seen in spurts this season, he can be great. I want to see it on a consistent basis. Sean Payton joked too, because Adam Troutman, I don't know if you know this, he's 5 catches away from an incentive, and he's like, that's what he gets for an entire season. So it's probably not going to happen on Sunday, but looking forward to RJ Harvey, the rookie running back. He's got 12 total touchdowns this year, and he's been so dynamic for this team. And I think if the Broncos are going to go deep in the playoffs, he's going to have to continue to grow and evolve in his game. So can he have a big game on the ground as well? That's going to be fun to see in this one. But Broncos country, Chargers fans, we're excited. And I think both teams, both franchises, fan bases, very expectant for what is to come. I mean, optimism is brimming this time of year. Of course, the stakes are high, but Broncos fans, I think we're believing that this is going to be a victory on Sunday. We'll see what happens, of course, in the postseason. However, for both of these teams, the AFC West, man, they're being run by the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers these days. So enjoy it. Enjoy the winning to both fan bases these days. Enjoy these young quarterbacks making plays out there, and enjoy the game on Sunday. We'll catch you on the next episode of the show.